Welcome, everyone. I'm joined today by Mehdi Raissi, the International Monetary Fund's resident representative in Armenia. Dr. Raissi, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I understand that on Monday, the IMF Executive Board approved a 3-year standby arrangement for Armenia in the amount of about $171 million. The money is meant to maintain macroeconomic stability, provide insurance against downside risks, and support a structural reform agenda. The Armenian government has indicated they will treat the arrangement as precautionary. Can you demystify that for our viewers? What does all of this mean? And in concrete terms, what does it mean for Armenia's economy?
Would be happy to. Yes, the new standby arrangement was approved on Monday. It would support the authorities' efforts in preserving macro, financial, and fiscal stability. Let me go into each of these areas in a little bit of detail. This means that on the fiscal side, a 2023 government budget that is supportive of Armenia's development needs and also a medium-term path of spending that maintains public debt at moderate level. This would also require raising additional revenues so that it can pay for health, education, social protection, and capital projects in the country. So that's the first aspect. On the monetary policy side, we know that inflation is high and it actually erodes the purchasing power of many ordinary Armenians. So the monetary policy that would bring inflation down towards the central bank target of 4% over time is something which is important. And also this will be supported by exchange rate policy that maintains the flexibility, because this is a shock absorber and it's good to have that. And also some reserve buffers in case something goes wrong and there's a need to use those reserves. So that's the second element. And on the financial side, we have seen that house prices have gone up, rental prices have gone up in Yerevan in particular, and there's some vulnerabilities. So there's a need to maintain and keep measures that would mitigate these risks in the financial sector, for the banking system to have enough capital to withstand shocks, and for the central bank to have regulatory supervision mechanisms that would support the strength of the financial sector. So that's the pillar one of our program. Pillar two is investing in the future and making sure that Armenia will grow sustainably, and a growth that benefits everybody, is inclusive. So for that, we are supporting a package of structural reforms that are spelled out in the 2021 to 2026 government program. And the focus is on trade and investment, facilitating trade and investment, developing infrastructure and connectivity in the country, making it easier for the private sector to do business in Armenia, digitalization, creating jobs, because unemployment is high. Used to be high in Armenia, now it's at these historical low levels. And also the social protection, protecting everybody, making sure that growth is inclusive. And one thing which we will all face in the future is climate change, so making sure that we build resilience against climate change. These we cannot do on our own, so we will rely on the support of many other development partners here, and the authorities will rely on that as well. So that's the second pillar. And then the third pillar is the insurance policy. You mentioned that the program that we are supporting, the authorities would like to treat it as precautionary. So it's like an insurance policy. If there's an accident, God forbid, but if there's an accident, that can be utilized. So this is broadly the nature of our the program that we're supporting.
Great, thank you for breaking that down for us. I'm wondering, for folks who may not be familiar with the IMF and what it is and what it does, What exactly is a standby arrangement? When we see the figure $171 million, it's a lot of money for Armenia. So where exactly is that money going? How is that money going to be accessed?
So the IMF actually, the way we work, we provide three things. One is financing. So this money, the $171 million, this is, as I mentioned, it's precautionary. So it depends if, God forbid, but if there is a shock down the road and Armenia needs to use that money, the money is available, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the money is lent at this stage. So it's precautionary. We had the same arrangement last time, and then in 2020, two big shocks happened: the global COVID-19 pandemic, and also the war in Nagorno-Karabakh. So. And at that time, the insurance policy came in handy, and the authorities used the money. So this 171 million can be used on a precautionary basis. So that's the financing part. We also provide capacity development here, a lot of technical work, technical assistance, we call it sometimes. That's the second type of work that we do here. And the third one is policy advice. If something, a question comes up and there's a need for consultation, we are always available to do that.
Great. So a few weeks ago, the IMF actually released a study on raising Armenia's export potential. In the study, the authors argue for a need to focus on creating higher complexity products to promote a competitive trade structure, export diversification, and sustainable growth. What is the IMF doing in Armenia in this regard?
So this is actually the policymakers in Armenia. They always stress the importance of exports as a growth driver. This is spelled out in 2021-26 government program. It is part of the export strategy that the Ministry of Economy is developing as we speak. So what are the objectives? The objectives are, number one, having high value added, sophisticated exports. Having that would contribute to growth, to long-term growth, because it would create a more competitive economic structure in the economy. So that's objective number one. Objective number two is expanding the range of products that Armenia exports. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, so you want to have a diversified export basket, and exports that are sophisticated, that generate high value added. So that's the second thing, and making sure that Armenia increasingly gets integrated into global value chains. So that's the second objective. And then the third objective is to diversify the export markets. Again, the same terminology, not all the eggs in one basket. You want to have diversified export destination, so that if something goes wrong in one destination, you have some sort of risk pooling and risk sharing, and making sure that the impact on Armenia as a small open economy will be limited. So in this context, to achieve these three objectives, we did this study which shows that achieving these goals, it requires concerted policy efforts. Let me explain a little bit on the measures that would help with that. Some examples. This is not an exhaustive list. Measures include integration of Armenia into global value chains. For example, by developing trade and economic cooperation deeper in the Eurasian Economic Union. Relying on, let's say, the trade provision and arrangements of the EU SEPA or the EU Eastern Partnership, and more generally the WTO, World Trade Organization, expanding and deepening cooperation within that framework. So that's one thing. Apart from the study that you mentioned, our program, the new standby arrangement. It also supports these objectives, again, in line with the government program, in line with the strategy that the Ministry of Economy is developing, and specific reforms that we spelled out in the program that we are supporting relate to customs procedures and making sure that the clearance are shorter in duration. That helps with trade, and also infrastructure and connectivity. Also the telecommunication networks, and they all, more broadly, the education system in the country, and also access to finance. So these are different components of making a good, diversified, tradable sector in Armenia.
Great. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February, international financial institutions began warning of severe adverse economic spillover in the region. Armenia is closely tied to Russia economically. But in fact, what we've seen is a massive influx of Russians to Armenia, especially Yerevan, and that has contributed considerably to a double-digit economic boom this year. I'm wondering, given your expertise, how could Armenia make the most out of this opportunity and turn what has been a short-term boom into more long-term and sustainable growth?
Indeed, the war in Ukraine, it resulted in a range of cross-border developments. As you mentioned, it resulted in international arrivals to Armenia. We look at the flights, we look at the hotel occupancy rates, we look at the number of tourists in the country. Significantly higher. Also relocation of businesses and individuals, mostly entrepreneurs. So some numbers would help the discussion. There has been 57,000 Russians moving here. Close to 2,000 new foreign-owned companies opened up in Armenia. 3,000 entrepreneurs, again, foreign individual entrepreneurs operating here, particularly in the IT sector, and about 6,000 new employees. Again, so that's the second aspect. And then there has been significant money transfers, whether it's capital or remittances, significant money transfers, a lot of new bank accounts in Armenia, about 89,000 new bank accounts since the onset of the war in Ukraine, and increased trade, in particular trade with Russia. Which means that there will be more concentration on that market. So these developments, as you rightly pointed out, contributed to boosting Armenia's 2022 economic growth. But at the same time, we should not underestimate the policy frameworks, strong policy frameworks that Armenia has and has developed over time, and the authorities' efforts making sure that that these inflows are absorbed in an orderly manner. The flip side of this high growth is inflation. Inflation, CPI inflation, also wages, high rents in the country. So these are the short-term developments that reflect strong policy frameworks, large inflows of income, capital, labor, and enterprise into the country. But at the same time, they generate some risks down the road. Let me explain that. The way we look at it is that uncertainty is extremely high about the medium-term prospects. If I break it down into labor, capital, and trade, on the labor side, when we look at the survey data, we see that the inflows, 90% of them are of working age. They have high level of education. They are employed, and mostly in the IT sector. So these would bode well for potential growth in the country if they're absorbed. But there are some concerns. The international visitors are concerned about high prices, inflation. They're concerned about accommodation. They're concerned about transfers of money here, opening bank accounts, and doing business. So going back to your question, what can the authorities do about that? It's all about making sure that these people will stay here for longer and making it easier for them to access quality public and private services in Armenia. It goes also towards education, healthcare, etc., etc. On the capital side, there has been significant amount of foreign direct investment into Armenia. These new registered companies into Armenia, again, good for growth over the longer term. So making sure that if there is a capital reversal, the reversal will be orderly, and there are buffers to withstand that reversal. And on the trade side, again, there is significant concentration on the Russian market. Hopefully there will be more diversification down the road in line with the strategies that the Ministry of Economy is developing and the government is following in its program, making sure that that the markets are diversified, export basket is diversified, and the government follows through on its structural reform agenda that it has for the next few years. So these are some of the elements that would ensure that this opportunity is actually seized and leads into higher growth down the road.
Great, thank you for breaking that down in such a helpful way. I'm wondering, just to continue on that topic a little bit, there's talk in Armenia nowadays of the issue of re-exporting products to Russia, importing to Armenia and then re-exporting to Russia. We don't know publicly how much of that accounts for the big boost in trade with Russia this year. I'm wondering, can you comment?
So we look at the data. The data comes usually with a lag, and so we have to wait and see what the actual data would tell us. But the signs indicate that there's, yes, more exports to Russia because of the exit of many companies from many European companies from the Russian market, and Armenia is currently catering towards that need, and also re-exports to Russia. I think the key issue here is to make sure that the sanctions, international sanctions, are complied with, and otherwise exports can go anywhere. So that's the key issue here. And over time, diversifying the markets would be in line with the government's objectives.
Sure. So looking forward now, we're approaching the end of the year here. I'm wondering, where do you see Armenia's economy moving forward next year? The Armenian government is forecasting more growth, albeit at a slower pace than this year. Based on your experience, what can we look out for in the new year?
So the near-term growth, as I mentioned, the momentum is very strong at the moment. This is mostly driven by consumption and also the surge in inflows of capital, labor, income, and enterprise. But there's significant uncertainty. Uncertainty relates to the global inflation and the policy actions of many central banks around the world, tightening policies to contain inflation. That makes the financial conditions tighter, global financial conditions. So that will have implications for Armenia. And then in terms of the trading partners of Armenia, there are not only Russia, but Europe and many other parts of the world are going through an economic slowdown, and this will have implications for Armenia. The energy crisis that Europe is facing at the moment, high food and energy prices, this will also have implications for Armenia. So taking all those into account, and also adding the tightening, monetary policy tightening that the Central Bank of Armenia is doing to contain inflation. We expect a growth of somewhere between 4 and 5% next year, which is close to the potential growth of Armenia. So what we don't want to happen for any country is overheating of the economy. At the moment, there is excess demand, aggregate demand, which is leading to inflation, overheating of the economy. So there's a need for some cooling period down the road. But having said that, there could be significant upside risks. So if Armenia implements its government reform program in full and in a speedy manner, it could lead to higher growth. If the influx of international visitors they stay here for longer, that would also bode well for growth next year. So there's significant uncertainty at the moment.
Great. Well, Dr. Raissi, thank you very much for your time and for your insights.
Of course, my pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet. If you would like to support our independent journalism, you can go on our website and find the donate button at the top of your page. Every dollar helps our reporters continue their crucial work in Armenia and Karabakh. Thank you.